Hello, and welcome to a series of conversations on self-marriage. I'm here with Teresa Trout, and we're going to be talking today about her self-marriage back in 2014. It feels a little bit like the OG back in 2014. So I'm
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did you hear about self-marriage and what inspired you to do it?
Yeah. I was living in Nevada City, California, this little rural town outside of Sacramento, and a woman that I knew led them. That's sort of, and so she had this online course, and I had never heard of the idea. And at that time, I had made a big transition in my life. I had moved from San Diego, where I'd lived for a decade. I had just graduated this intensive healing program and was in this just place of transition. And it was my 30th birthday, and I'd just gone through this self marriage sort of process. And so I was like, this is what I need.
Hmm.
Um, there's also a layer, a huge reason why I did it was because in my 20s, part of my healing was seeing the pattern of disrupted, like not healthy relationships. I saw that I was having sort of these cycle of unhealthy relationships. And here I was sort of going into my 30s, really wanting to be a mom, really wanting to have a partner. And the idea was really beautiful of, oh, wait, I need to like be my own partner first. I need to really build this relationship. So that was like a huge impetus to sort of that decision of I'm going to do this. I'm going to have a marriage ceremony for myself.
Absolutely. And you bring an additional perspective that I think is really important. You're a therapist by profession. And so it's not even just that you felt intuitively called to this thing, which would be reason enough, but I'm guessing that you have some context around why it might be valuable. Would you be willing to share some of that with us?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Here we are 7 years later. And in those 7 years, I've gotten my master's degree. And my focus is in expressive arts therapy. And there's this really interesting there's this foundational piece that in 15 years of therapy, no one talked to me about attachment theory.
Hmm.
And so about 3 years ago in graduate school, I started learning about attachment theory. And so for those who don't know, attachment theory was developed in the 60s and 70s by an individual named John Bowlby. It was really focused on working with children and understanding the children's individual attachment with their caregivers. And he had always meant to translate this and do more research with adults. And others who have followed him have done it. But a lot of attachment theory is still focused on kids. And so the blueprint, the essence is that our early childhood attachments, they form a blueprint for the kinds of connections that we not only expect, but that we seek in not only adult romantic relationships, but also in, intimate relationships. And so it's interesting, 7 years later, actually about to come up on the anniversary of my self marriage and actually having gotten engaged this year. I'm
Woot woot!
planning, thank you.
Yay!
So I'm planning a wedding with a partner. And so there's a lot of this beautiful revisiting, which was lovely when I connect. I was like, oh, self marriage is coming in again. Um, but I didn't realize that at 30, when I did my self marriage, I didn't realize that I had attachment trauma,
Hmm.
that my disrupted attachment in my own childhood was a huge reason why I was struggling in my relationships and why I continued even in my 30s to struggle and having to do that healing. And so I had this sort of idea, and not just me, people who talk and write about attachment now, this idea of how do we build a healthy attachment, what they call a secure base with ourselves first and foremost, before we can go out and have these relationships, have these partnerships. And it really comes down to, in my work, I often say it's the journey of reparenting ourselves. A lot of my work is not about parent blaming. Yes, there's some parents you look at and go, ooh, not so great. But we're all products, we're systems of a product of our systems and our families and generational. And so even the most loving parents can pass on some of these layers. And then when you add in abuse or drug addiction or grief, there's the way that we sort of regulate. And so there's this concept I think I work with a lot with my clients around as adults. We're not only going back and healing some of that, but part of it is now we have to be our own parent. We have to learn how to have a relationship with our younger self. And so for me, how I conceptualize self-marriage now, it's so deeply rooted in this idea of like really building a secure relationship with myself. And so I am through and through an attachment theory therapist. It really resonates and it's a huge part of my story.
Yeah, I also love attachment theory, and it was a big game changer for me. I wonder if you could give our watchers, listeners, a rundown of the different types. There's, avoidant, secure,
Yeah.
anxious, and disorganized, I think. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So there is sort of four types in some ways. Well, three types, but then there's also secure. And one of the things I'll say is there's a book that was written in 2020 by a woman named Jessica Fern. It's called Polysecure. It's specifically about attachment and consensual non-monogamy. But I'm recommending this book to my monogamous couples. I am recommending it to, because it's not, yes, there is, but the first 100 pages are hands down the best overview that I have seen about attachment, because she also talks about these four quadrants, these four attachments. As children, they name it as anxious, avoidant, disorganized, or secure. I don't really actually understand why in adults they have, like, they say like anxious as a child, they call it preoccupied as an adult. Some books have that languaging. For me, I still call it anxious. Same thing. Avoidant, they call it dismissive as an adult. And that to me, I'm like, I don't really know why the theorists sort of have that in there. So I'll be honest. So like, and then there's disorganized, which they call fearful avoidance. I stick with anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. And so anxious is kind of like where you get dysregulated and you're longing for that attachment. That's love me, love me, love me. I need you to be there. I need you to validate me. I need you to reassure me. My sense of myself is so based in the other. And so it's a lot of this pulling energy. It's a lot of, you didn't text me this time, you didn't show up at this time, and this anxiety that happens. And avoidant is just kind of that simpler, that like, it's that push away. It's that I'm not going to let you be too close to me because you might hurt me. So they're the folks who tend to hard to trust, sometimes hard to sort of get in and connect in with their emotions. Take a long time to say I love you, hard to commit. And then there's disorganized, which is the push and pull. Love me, love me, love me. No, 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 go away, go away, go away. And so there's this push and this pull. And then there's secure attachment. And so what Jessica Fern talks about is it being on a spectrum. And that it also, we can have an anxious attachment with one and an avoidant attachment with another. That it can shift and it can change. And so a lot of, almost every one of my clients, I say, hey, I want you to just do me a favor. Let's go learn your attachment style. And time again, I have these clients who come back and like, I think I'm gonna avoid an attachment. And I'm like, oh, really? It's like, I can see it. They just talk about it. It's like, it's so valuable because then it also gives an explanation for why they struggle to be regulated. And it also opens up if I have an anxious attachment, then I know how to communicate that with my partner. And I'm able to say, hey, when you say you're going to be home at 6, I really need you to be home at 6, or I need you to communicate. And so it opens up how you to communicate while you work on the journey of learning how to regulate. Because it comes down to a place of, as children, they did this study by having children, babies in the room with caregivers, and like what happens when the caregiver leaves. Does the child have a healthy sort of anxious of like, okay, where's mom? Can they soothe themselves? Or are they avoidant of like, whatever, it doesn't matter that mom left. And so that's sort of where that research, and it makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
as we grow older. And the thing that I love about it too is that it's not a death, it's not a forever. It's really like we can rebuild some of these habits and patterns.
Mm.
And that's where I think the continuing the ritual, that part of the anniversary and the coming back to yourself is
Mm.
such a huge piece of it, because attachment, whether you have attachment trauma, like very disruptive attachment, or you know your mother was anxious and so you're anxious, again we learn by the people we saw. And so
Mhm.
we learn by our caregivers. And if we've moved a lot, that impacts us. If we have had death and lost family,
Mm.
all of these things have an impact on how we see the world,
Mhm.
how we see ourselves, how we communicate or don't communicate, and how we're able to regulate ourselves. And if we don't have that awareness, then we're going to continue some of these cycles.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to look at the value of self-marriage is creating that sturdy base. And it's not that people with avoidant or disorganized or anxious, it's not that there's anything wrong with them.
No.
Like you said, it's just something that was learned. And if we can use self-marriage to better establish a sturdy base, and then the rituals that come after it to bolster it and integrate it, then we
Yeah.
can really reap the benefits of the self-parenting like you're talking about.
Absolutely. And that's where I find, as a therapist, I always talk about both diagnoses, like the clinical diagnoses and these labels, and saying, let's really hold them with a grain of salt. We humans have created them. So if I were to go on and do a PhD today, it would be in attachment theory, because my instinct and my gut tells me there's more than just these three categories.
Mm.
And there's other way that maybe we can look at it, because again, these theorists, these psychologists, these psychotherapists are creating these categories, and so we might fit into them, but let's not see these as, again, something that's wrong with me, but I have these certain set of symptoms that other people, or these certain set of reactions or responses that these other people might have too, and we're just going to label it like this. And so how do you find empowerment in the label? And that's where I'm always come back to, like, the knowledge is power.
Mm.
And I feel like, yeah, it is a piece, the populations I probably love working with the most are folks in their 20s,
Mhm.
because I feel like you come out of this adolescence and these teen years and you're suddenly supposed to be an adult. And yet, particularly in the US culture, it's okay, you're 18 now, go off. And people really struggle because they're having to face the realities of the world. They're having to have huge responsibilities, especially if they haven't already. They're in relationships in a more intimate level. And there's just a lot of complexity. And not that just folks in their 20s, I think every, happens throughout life. But yeah, how do we rebuild this foundation?
Mhm.
My little soapboxes, as much as I value teenagers taking like AP calculus, and we need the physicists of the world, I wish our curriculum had, I wish teens learned about attachment theory. I wish they learned about communication and healthy relationships. I wish that was a foundational piece of what we taught um,
Yes.
students. Yeah, that to me, I'm like, there's so much more value for that in our everyday world, in addition to sort of the specializations of, yes, dive deep into learning AP physics. We need those
Yes,
too.
of course. Of course. It fits my soapbox too, because I think that there's something around self-love that is yet to be ritualized in society, and that there's an opportunity for it, either in a more formal way or just in a person by person way, where you're coming out of, like you said, adolescence and into your 20s, or maybe you've even lived through your 20s, and in your 30s or 40s or 50s, you realize, wow, I need that extra solid base. I need to bolster myself. There isn't a time and a way of offering that support to people that says, oh, here's a way to do that. Like, here's what you
Yeah.
might be missing, and here's how we can create something that would support you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us more about your day. Like, what made it so special for you?
Well, I want to start by, can I share my
Yeah,
invitation? Because I still
please.
look at it and it makes me just really happy. This was my this was my invitation that I sent out to folks.
Mm.
Um, and, you know, let me see, I have another one. So this was me. This is me here in this dress and my ritual. And what was so special for me about my ritual was the woman facilitating it had been my therapist, my counselor for quite a few years. And she's seen me through this. I said I'd been part of a women's healing organization, and I'd done a 4-year, lived in a community home with other women, and did some really beautiful deep dive. And I feel like that was so influential that time in my life. And I had just left San Diego and was embarking on sort of this new phase. And I knew I wanted to do the grad program that I eventually did. I said I knew it. I'd known it for so long. I had paused to take this healing journey, my own healing some of my own childhood trauma. And yet here I was about to be 30. I'd been really sick. I thought maybe I had Lyme disease. I now sort of see it as fibromyalgia. Again, those titles of like, it was very sort of like, oh, okay, this explains what's happening in my chronic pain and in my body and why I have chronic fatigue. And so I'd taken this time to go back to my hometown, back to nature. And I was confused because I knew what I wanted to do professionally, but I didn't feel ready to embark on graduate school. And I was struggling with depression. I really see my depression now. I still navigate and experience depression. It's so intertwined within my physical pain. Mm-hmm. And so I also was really burnt out. I'm a very, in Ayurveda, they would say pitta person. I'm a triple Scorpio. And so I'm very fiery, very passionate, very hardworking. And I was burnt out. And I was wanting to find relationships. While I was in that program, I had not been in relationships. I had intentionally taken a break after a series of unhealthy relationships in my 20s. So here I was, like, really wanting this career, wanting motherhood, wanting to find a partner. And then that's sort of when the self-marriage sort of came out. And so this ritual that I did was so beautiful because my counselor, she helped co-create it with me over the course of like many months. And then I invited people who were really meaningful in my life. I invited sort of my soul family, my chosen family. My best friend, who I've known since I was 11, surprised the hell out of me, drove 8 hours overnight just to be there. Wow. And so it was really, I was like, what are you doing here? And she's like, I'm here. I would have missed this. And I was like, what? And so it was really, really special.
Yeah. You said that you incorporated the elements into the ceremony. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, I grew up in a pretty atheist home. And so for me in my 20s, I didn't really understand where I stood in spirituality. My parents didn't allow me to go to church with friends. And so it was really this sort of forbidden anti-religion. And so in my 20s, I also didn't resonate with organized religion, but I couldn't really sort of find myself. And that's when I eventually found my way to what I call earth-based spirituality. I don't call it paganism because I don't actually know enough about the practice of paganism, but for me, earth-based spirituality was this piece around coming back to the earth, really believing in the cycles and the rhythms. My birthday being in October, I've always been really connected with fall. And fall is this journey into winter and the darkness of winter. I love working with mythologies and archetypes. And so this archetype of, going into the underworld, like Persephone does, the Greek goddess, of going into the underworld. And so for me, so I brought in some of these elements. But I also brought in the ritual, I was revisiting it as I was preparing for us. And so I was rereading some of these things, and she was, writing from, really helping me stand in the space of my emotional body, connecting in with my emotions. And from that space, like making these invitations and these accepting. And so in my emotional, in my physical, in my spiritual. And so there's these pieces where I was really honoring, and now as a therapist, I kind of back it with a theory, honoring the parts of myself, these different parts of myself that are all sort of integrated into this person who is Teresa Trout. And, what is this fiery Scorpio? And really this commitment, one of the things I was reading about was, she asked, do you commit to choosing life in your darkest moments of fear, shame, guilt, disbelief, anger, and rage? Do you commit to following through with this lifetime without wavering in your commitment to yourself and this community? And so the reason why that was so important, because this was 2014, and in 2012, I had a psychiatric hospitalization. I had, I struggled with depression and struggled with suicidal ideations. And so I had voluntarily hospitalized myself because I was afraid that I would do something very impulsive. And so these 2-year journey from 2012 to 2014 was really wrapping around my mental health, really supporting, recognizing that I had depression, that for me, medication was really helpful for that. And, this beautiful commitment of, can I commit to this lifetime of embracing the darkness? And again, I go back to Persephone being okay in the underworld. She was the goddess, the queen of the underworld, guiding people from one, in their passing. And so I think for me, that was a huge piece of this, was that I was really trying to rebuild myself and be like, I don't want to end my life. I want to end this pain. And this pain was this battle with myself. The pain was the battle with my physical self and my emotional self, and not being able to reconcile and release, right, some of the pain and the hurt that had happened to me as a child. And so that's a huge piece that, I share with my clients, like, hey, like, I'm not over here and I don't have it all figured out. Like, I experience depression. I navigate that, and I've learned how to manage it, and I've learned how to create a relationship with it. And the number one way I feel like my healing has happened is learning how to have a relationship with, I call her TT. TT is my 5-year-old self. She's that young self that at that age started to sort of develop some of these thoughts and these beliefs. And I see them now as like, so my depression now is like a storm that comes in. I'm like, oh, the storm is here, but I know there's going to be blue skies again. And so when I look back at that, and this is where I think the elements are so tuned in, because I deeply connect in with Mother Earth and the rhythms. And even here, I'm in the Bay Area now. We don't have like the seasons like I did up in the Sierra Nevada foothills, but there's a winter, there's a summer, it's just, you have to tune in a little bit closer to it. So yeah,
I really hear a lot of self-acceptance in that. And self-marriage is not something that's meant to eliminate all the things we don't like about ourselves, right? It's a way of practicing self-compassion and self-love, even for the parts that we're still working on, just as they are. And what an amazing example of how you got to create this intentional relationship with your depression, and how it's helped you to weather it and be with it when it comes in. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let me think about, so rituals, like I love rituals. And what is marriage, right? What is a marriage? This is definitely a societal and cultural sort of concept that has been, created. But when I think about a marriage between individuals, it's not about our relationship is perfect and everything's okay and there are no issues, but it's, my partner and I say, and the highs and our lows. Our song is beautiful song called Highs and Lows. And the question is like, will you love me in my highs and my lows? Will you be there for me on the good days and the bad? And that's where the traditional wedding vows, sickness and health. And that's no different with myself. It's not about And I like, even 7 years later, you know, I see how it's not been a perfect 7 years.
Mhm.
And I've struggled and I've gone away from sort of my vows at times, and then I've come back, and this commitment. And that's where the ritual of it, and for me, my ring comes
Mhm.
into place. Yeah.
Well, I want to hear about your ring. And before we do that, one of the rituals from your self marriage that I think is particularly special is this idea that everybody blessed the ring. How did you come up with that, and what did people say?
I don't even know how I came up with that. I don't know if that was, I feel like honestly that was a spur of the moment thing. I don't think, when I look through here, she has the ritual ending and then we just celebrate. And I think it was yeah, and this is my, let's see if I can see. I don't know if it comes through. It's
Beautiful.
just a moonstone. It is not an expensive ring. It was a very sort of cheap ring, but I was drawn to it. Um, and yeah, I had about 25 people there, and they all sat in a circle around us at the ritual, and then afterwards, yeah, I had each person sort of hold the ring, and it feels like sort of the what do you call it at the wedding when other people say things, the toast. It
Mhm.
kind of felt like that, but this one was people really holding, and some people like whisper things in that I don't even know. Um, I think it comes from sort of the earth-based pagan views of like charging things up, charging the stones in the
Mhm.
moonlight, bringing the magic into it, bringing intention.
Mhm.
And so for me, it was, I really wanted these people who, I mean, one of the people there, I'd known her since I was 5. She'd known me for so long. My best friend I knew since I was 11. These people were all from different walks of life.
Mhm.
And so to have them each really honor who I was, who they saw, and how committed I was to my healing, to self growth, to transformation, how it really is like a part of my life.
Mhm.
Um, and just something where when I look at this ring and like I put it on every day, it's like I'm really holding like the past and the present, and it's that, when I imagine you get a ring from a partner, what my engagement ring means to me. This is like I gave it to myself, but everyone was there to really bless it and honor it, and that was really magical.
Mm. So, since your self marriage, what has the impact been for you?
Hmm. I mean, I think there's something beautiful. So for me, my self marriage was on my birthday. And so since then, I have a birthday ritual that I do. For me, rituals are a lot about, I have altars that I do. I do a vision board for myself for the new year, but I start setting the roots of it in October 25th is my birthday, right? And so for me, the period of November and December is all about taking stock of the past year and really looking at the challenges and the wins, and then releasing, okay, what doesn't serve me? What do I want to call in? What patterns am I stuck in? How do I want to shift and change? And so it's this process that I kind of go through every year. And that process really got started sort of in that time of, I'm going to really honor myself. I'm going to honor this journey and this life. And there's this piece around putting on this ring that at times that this ring has been that touchstone, because I have had some dark nights and some dark times in these last 7 years. I lost my father suddenly, and that was complex. One of my partners completed suicide, my ex, and so there were some deaths and some loss that had happened, and then also some of these sort of rebirths. And so for me, I see my self marriage in in alignment with some of these other powerful rituals or times in my life,
Mhm.
where it's a touchstone
Mhm.
of, oh, here I am. this is my commitment to myself. And so when it gets really hard, grad school was so challenging in so many ways. Anyone who goes through that journey, it's such the irony of like being in a profession where we promote self-care and sustainability, and then being in a program where that's like impossible is, kind of funny for me. But this touchstone of like, oh, I have this ritual and this time to come back to myself over and over and over and over. And that for me is that I say yes, I say yes, I say yes.
So tell us a little bit more about that. Is it that you do that every day when you look at your ring? Do you take the ring off at night and put it back on? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how are you ritualizing the commitments you made to yourself so as to embody them more, to bolster them? What is it
Yeah.
exactly you do?
Yeah. So for my ring in particular, I take it off every night. And then every morning when I put it on, it's just as simple as I say, I love you. I like touch it and I say, I love you. And that's it. That's sort of the simpleness of the ceremony. When I am having really hard times, it has been a thing that I've come to and been, reminding myself I'm here. This is my commitment. I love you. I find myself, seeing it, it's just a sort of part of me. And for the longest time, it was the only ring that I wore. I didn't have any other rings. Um, but it really comes down to that simple thing. Every morning I put it on and I say, I love you. And it really is for me that simple.
Beautiful. I want to actually backtrack a little bit because there's a question that's come up for me lately around a phenomenon where just when we're about to do something that symbolizes a personal breakthrough for ourselves, sometimes the universe offers one last obstacle. Like
Mm.
it's saying, like, are you really sure like that you're ready for this? And I'm curious if you had anything like that leading up to your self-marriage.
That's a really good question. Well, there's definitely, for me, yes. I mean, part of it is, again, now I see it through the lens of attachment. I had gone in a new relationship, and that period of time was the first 6 months of this relationship. And now, in hindsight, I see that when I don't live with a partner, my anxious attachment is really high. That when I cohabitate with a partner, I'm able to create a secure base in a very different way. And I didn't really see that pattern at that time. So at that time, there was so much interpersonal conflict, so much, just challenges coming up with me and my partner. And I see it now as just like how anxious I was of needing validating, needing reassurance that I was loved, needing. And so it's, there was definitely this period, where I questioned, is this lip service? Like, what does it mean to me making this out? Because I was not at a place, one of the things I remember saying, and I love this, so now I can look back and say, oh, I love myself now. But in my 20s, I said, I don't like myself. And I want to learn how to love myself, but that felt impossible. My journey was, okay, I've got to learn how to like myself, and then I can love myself. And so here I was at 29, and I still didn't really like myself, let alone love myself. And so there were some of these vows that were like, is this true? Am I really able to make these? Because I'm such a mess. I'm such a wreck. I'm on this emotional roller coaster. There was no ground. Everything, grad school felt so far away. My health was so confusing, finances, relationships. And so at that time, I was not I was not where I'm at now in my life. I was not stable and healthy and feeling really solid. I was very tumultuous. And so I think that there was a lot of questioning of like, what does this mean? And can I say yes to this?
Yeah.
And I think, fortunately, because I'd been working with my counselor therapist for so long, she really understood me and understood my journey. She'd been there through my hospitalization. And so she was sort of this guiding force of bringing me back to myself, of reminding me, you got this, you're here. But yeah, I definitely think so. It's like I think back, as I'm about to be 37 this year, I think of, oh, okay, yeah, what was happening in these different years of like this was 2014, and then what happened in 2015 and 2016 when I started graduate school. Definitely that, like, are you sure? Are you ready? Can you really do this? And there was, when I look at some of these rituals or some of these things, there was some of this where it was like, yes, I'm saying yes, but am I really, do you accept the invitation for life? And I was really like, I don't know. I don't know. But, really wanting it to be a yes.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Setting that intention and saying, I want it to be a yes, I'm going to declare it as a yes. And then it sounds like you've just revisited these things over and over and over again until they've become true.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely, I mean, and that's, I think, the work for me personally. It's continued therapy and healing. For me, externalizing my younger self, being able to understand her, give her a voice, give her a name, really understand like the journey of reparenting her, all of those pieces. And for me, this is not for everybody, and I honor everyone's view. But for me, getting my depression, being able to manage my own sort of bio brain chemistry, all of those pieces together have built up, in addition to other journeys and healing rituals and things that I've done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what advice would you give to someone that's thinking about self marriage?
Do it. Do it. I mean, such a powerful, it's such a powerful, it's such a powerful process. What's beautiful about it is that it can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. It can be as organic and natural. It can be as big or as small. And that there's just such a beauty about saying yes to yourself. And what does it mean to say yes to yourself? Because I feel like, a lot of us as children and teenagers, we have this idea of what it means to be an adult. So now I'm an adult and I'm like, oh my gosh, when is this going to get easier? And especially right now, right? Here it is, September 8th, 2021. Coming out of this panic, still in this pandemic, this has been a huge test. And it's been a huge, a lot of folks have struggled and are struggling. It's been a hard time, for us globally. And so how do we come out of this and come into ourselves and into this new world? Because, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, there was this idea of like, okay, when things go back to normal. And now it's a new normal. It's a new orientation. It's a new way. Yeah. And it's going to be like that for a while. And so, in addition to that, and like climate change, right now my heart is aching in California with, all of our wildfires. And I mention these because like there's these models. One of the things I also really, is like ecology models, where it's like self, family, community, global, spirit, like we're part of all these interrelated systems. Mm-hmm. And so to kind of go back to this question of what would I say, it's yeah, at the beginning of that sort of circular model, it's the self. And then it becomes family. Then it becomes part, then it kind of spreads out and into things. But at the heart of it, it's, my sort of spiritual view, again, I know others believe in other things, is I don't know what happens after this. I don't know. I believe, in all possibilities. I don't know if I'm going to be aware of another lifetime. But what I know is that I have this one lifetime, and I have this one body, and I have this one mind and spirit, and this is what I have. And so how do I say yes to this and come back into that sort of foundational piece, no matter what adversity and challenges are happening in all of the other areas? And so that's where I think this is such a powerful process that I would absolutely encourage folks to do, because it comes down to saying yes to myself, saying yes to my healing and my growth. I believe in healing is nonlinear. It doesn't just happen in a vacuum. Clients come to me and they say, hey, I'm a healing guide for this time. We might be on this journey together for 4 months. It might be 4 years. And the healing, it's not going to fix you. There's not going to be a thing that gets fixed after this. You might get some changes and shifts and, deep healing. And the journey of being human is, I believe, a constant process of healing and growth. And I know, as I'm trying to become a mother and have a family, well, that's just going to bring up its own other stuff, and it's going to bring in new complexities and new triggers. And so how do I come back to saying yes and knowing myself and knowing who I am and honoring? I could never in the past honor that, like, my big fiery spirit. I'm like, I'm a firecracker. I'm a big firecracker. And now I can say that I like really love myself, and not every day. It's not perfect. I'm not,
Yes.
I haven't reached enlightenment or anything,
Well, I
but
love
that
this.
journey is,
Yeah,
yeah.
I love this invitation to the journey and a self-marriage as part of the journey. So thank you so much, Teresa, for sharing your journey with us and
Thank you.
for
Thank you
all of the
for
wisdom.
writing this book and for
Well,
sharing this work with others. It's so beautiful.
it's an honor.